And so in 2 Timothy chapter number 1 is where we're going to get started at this morning. If you want to stand up, we'll read a few verses right quick as we get into the Scripture. And so as we're just talking about real faith this morning, I just want you to be keeping that in mind as we read these verses and as we get into the message. And so 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse number 5, it says, "When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and am persuaded that in thee also. Wherefore I put in the remembrance that thou stirrest up the gift of God, which is in thee, by putting on my hands. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind." And so let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, we thank you for your kindness and your mercy. God, we thank you for what you've done in our hearts and our lives. Thank you for all your many blessings. And God, we just pray that you would please just touch and move in here this morning. God, I pray that you'd use these verses to be an encouragement and to be a guidance to somebody, to help strengthen them, Lord. And God, we thank you for all your mercy. Thank you for the kindness that you showed us in our lives, Lord. And pray that you just please help us today, Lord. And we love you, God. In Jesus' name I pray, and amen. And so this morning, as we're talking about real faith, and in verse number 5 here, Paul is talking about Timothy's grandmother and mother, and he talks about how they had an unfeigned faith. And so what he's saying is, man, they didn't have a fake faith, they had a real faith. And I don't know about y'all, but fake people really drive me nuts. You know, you ever run into some of those people? I remember years ago, I met this one guy, and I was in a preacher's class, and so this guy, he come in, and man, he was dressed, top of the line. And so, he had it going on as far as his clothes went. And so he come in there and he was shaking our hands and he's like, "So you boys want to be preachers, you know?" And he's looking sharp and he's got this arrogant attitude. And immediately when I saw that guy, I thought, I don't want anything this guy's got to do with, you know? Like, I don't want no part of him. And so he had such a fake persona. He had the fake smile, and he was just trying to impress you with his attributes and all that kind of stuff. And really, we don't, none of us care about that kind of stuff, do we? And see, but Paul here, he remembered when he had met Timothy's mother and grandmother, he didn't remember them for the way they was dressed. He didn't remember them for, their fancy stories or nothing like that. He remembered them because they had a real faith. And that faith was so real that not only did it changed Timothy's mother, but it also changed Timothy also. And so now here Paul is writing this letter to Timothy talking about, about how real of a faith they had, and now he's encouraging Timothy as Timothy is taking on these tasks here, and as Timothy's getting involved in the ministry himself, here Paul is trying to encourage him and saying, hey, you've got the same real faith that they had. And so can I encourage you this morning that we should have a real faith? And our faith is important that it's real, because if our faith isn't real, then how are we going to pass down something to our children or to the people around us that's actually going to help them? And so what sense would that even make? And so here Paul, he makes a statement about them having an unfeigned faith. So they got a real faith. And then in verse number 7, he points out something. And because of this faith that they have, then there's some things that come along with it. Because in verse number 7 it says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear." Now that's an important thing. He's not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And so I just want to ask you today, in your faith, do you have power of God in your actions? And because that's an important thing, that we should have the power of God in our actions. In Ephesians chapter number 3 and verse number 20, it tells us, it says, "Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundant above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us." And so I want to ask you this morning, is there a power working in you? Because if you've got an unfeigned faith, if you've got a real faith, then is there any power that's working in you? Real faith brings power with it. And so as Christians, we ought to have a level of power in our life so that whenever we're ministering or witnessing or talking to somebody, there ought to be the power of God in us through our faith to be able to make a difference in our conversation with people. And so do you have that power in you this morning? That's a good illustration of whether or not you have an unfeigned faith or not. And then the second thing right here that I just want to point out is the fact that it talks about the love of God and our emotions. And so Romans chapter number 12 and verse number 10, it says, "Be ye kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another." And so if we've got a real faith, then that means that we can love others also. And so I don't know about y'all, but I've been an independent Baptist my whole entire life. And what I have noticed is that's not their strong suit, is loving people. And can I say that's not a good testimony? That does not illustrate a real faith when we can't love people, because in Matthew 9:36 it talks about when Jesus saw the multitude and how they were just with like sheep without a shepherd and just obviously not in a good place. You know what it says about Jesus? It says that Jesus had compassion on those people. And so if we really have a real faith, then we ought to be able to love people and prefer them. And then this one's a very important thing in this day and time. And then the verse number 7, it talks about a sound mind. Now, can I say that comes from God? Having a sound mind is an attribute that comes from the Lord. In James chapter number 1 and verse number 8, it tells us, it says, "A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways." And so this morning, those are just a couple little testers to see if you really have a real faith or not. And can I say that, man, having a fake faith will not get you anywhere, and it will not help you when you need help. I was in Thailand on a mission trip. I don't know, it's been 6 or 7 years ago now, and met some guys. And this one guy, his name was Udom, and he was a Thai national there, super nice guy. But Udom's father was a Buddhist. And so what his father did is his father went to the bank and said, "How much money will you loan me?" And so they figured up how much money they would loan this man, and they give it to him, and he immediately goes from the bank and goes to the Buddhist temple and gives them every bit of that money. Now, that's crazy, isn't it? When we go to the bank to get money, we're trying to get the next car or next house. But this guy, living very, very basic means, goes to that bank and takes all that money that they will give him and takes it right up there to the Buddhist temple and gives it to them because, according to what he's been taught, that's the only way that he can better himself with his God. And can I say that what that is a fake faith? Because whenever Udom's father needs something, he can't pray to that Buddhist God and it do anything for him. The hotel that we were staying in up in Nakhon Sawan, you could look out of the window and you could see this ginormous image of Buddha, and the China Buddha and the Thailand Buddha, they don't look nothing the same. And so Thailand people being fat is not a good thing. And so they've got a real skinny Buddha, which is kind of random to me, it's kind of weird. And so the Thai Buddha over there is just a skinny-looking, female-looking person, big, huge, enormous statue. And can I say that Udom's father, whenever something bad happens, even though he gave all that money, he could go up to that statue and pray and weep and pray and weep, and it's not going to make a difference, is it? And it's not going to help him at all, because even though he might have faith in something, it's not real and it's not going to make a difference. But can I say that our faith in Jesus Christ is a real faith, and it can make a difference if we'll allow it to make a difference in our life. And so if you want to turn over to John chapter number 20, you can flip over there right quick. And John chapter number 20, I want to point out something to you and ask you this morning, do you have a believing faith? And what I mean by that is, do you believe what Jesus Christ has said and what Jesus Christ has told you? Oftentimes, we don't really believe what He's told us. And so, I don't know if y'all remember all the stories in the Gospels, but whenever Jesus Christ was with His disciples, He already told them that He was going to be crucified, right? Even Peter rebuked Him and said, "No, that's not going to happen." And so, but Jesus told them exactly what was going to happen, that He was going to be crucified, that He was going to be raised on the third day. And so He went through the whole story with them. But can I say that Thomas did not believe that story? And so whenever Jesus Christ is already resurrected, Thomas, he didn't have a believing faith. In verse number 26 of John 20, it says, "And after 8 days, again His disciples were within, and Thomas with them. And then Jesus came, and the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you. And then He saith unto Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust into my side, and be not" what? Faithless, but believing. And so here's the issue. Jesus Christ had already visited these guys one time, but Thomas was not there. And so they all told Thomas, hey man, Jesus was here. We saw him. And you know what Thomas said? No. You know why? Because Thomas didn't have a believing faith. Now, Thomas's faith was Jesus, but he still didn't really believe Jesus. And so I want to ask you today, do you really believe Jesus can do things that you can't see? See, Thomas, he only believed after he saw. Like once he saw Jesus Christ standing there, he was like, well, I guess he is resurrected. So it wasn't good enough that Jesus Christ told him what he was going to do. The only way Thomas could believe was by seeing him standing there. And can I say that whether or not Jesus showed up to Thomas again or not does not change the greatness of Jesus Christ, does it? Whether or not Thomas would have ever saw Jesus Christ would not have changed the fact that Jesus Christ was resurrected. And can I say that when you don't see Jesus Christ for who He really is, and when you don't see Him for what He really is, it doesn't change who He is, it just changes your condition. See, Thomas's condition up to this point was discouraged and defeated. Now, after he saw Jesus Christ and realized that He really was resurrected, obviously he was not discouraged anymore after that, right? I mean, he's excited. He has just seen somebody that he knew for sure died on a cross, and now this guy is standing before him. And so Thomas is really excited now. And so can I say that if we really have faith and believe what Jesus Christ has told us, we can be a lot more excited and a lot more encouraged in our life and in our faith based on that. Because what a lot of Christians live today is a lot of Christians are just defeated because they don't really believe what Jesus has told us. See, they don't really just have faith, they just want to see things. And that's why a lot of these, try to be nice today, but that's why a lot of these different kind of churches and stuff like that thrive, because they try to do things that touch the flesh instead of the spirit. But see, it's important that we have a believing faith, because just because we can see it or not see it doesn't change what Jesus Christ is and what Jesus Christ can do. Jesus Christ can still change people. Jesus Christ can still work miracles contrary to whatever society may tell you. And the only thing is if you don't believe what Jesus Christ has already told us, it's only going to make us defeated. It doesn't make Jesus Christ any less of who He is. Jesus Christ and His greatness and His glory does not change based on our opinion. The only change that takes place is our character and our standing. And so I want to ask you this morning, do you feel like Thomas before he saw Jesus, or do you feel like Thomas after he saw Jesus? And so do you have that believing faith? I promise you, it can make all the difference in how you wake up in the mornings and how you spend your days. And it can make all the difference whenever you face problems if you really believe who Jesus Christ is. It's interesting that a lot of times we believe that Jesus Christ can save us and take us to heaven, but we don't believe that Jesus Christ can help us in our day-to-day life. I don't know about y'all, but that just seems a little crazy, don't it? He's got enough power and enough authority that He can take us to heaven when we die, but He doesn't have enough power and enough authority to help us when we're having trouble in our day. And so I just encourage you this morning that it's important that we have a believing faith. And then if you want to turn over to Matthew chapter number 21, I want to talk to you about having an obedient faith. Matthew chapter number 21, we'll look at verse number 28 here. Do y'all remember when Jesus Christ told Peter, He said, hey Peter, go down there and catch a fish and get the money out of the fish's mouth and go pay the taxes. Y'all remember when Jesus done that? Now that's super crazy, ain't it? I mean, that makes no sense at all. Like, what kind of logic is there to this? If Jesus Christ could put the money in the fish's mouth, why not just hand Peter the money? You know, I mean, that would have been a lot easier, wouldn't it? But see, what that took Peter believing what Jesus Christ just told him. And when Peter believed what Jesus Christ told him, then Peter was able to have the money to pay the taxes. And can I say that whenever we're facing problems in our life, a lot of times we don't really believe God can do something. And so when God tries to lead us or tries to show us what to do, we don't do it because we don't really believe Him to start with. And so can I say that just as much as Jesus Christ put the money in the fish's mouth for Peter, Jesus Christ can work in your personal life too. And just as much as that was just a personal matter that God helped Peter with, can I say that God can help us in all our small personal matters also? And there's nothing too small that we can't trust and believe God to help us with. And so, but Matthew 21 and verse 28, talking about an obedient faith here, it says, now just as Jesus talking again, and he says, "But what think ye? A certain man had 2 sons. And he came to the first and said, Son, go work today in my vineyard. And he answered and said, I will not. But afterward he repented and went. And he came to the second and said likewise. And he answered and said, I go, sir, and went not. And then he says, Whether of the twain did the will of his father? And they say unto him, The first. And Jesus saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, the publican and the harlots go into the kingdom of God before you. Now, what I mean by this obedient faith here is me growing up in church and being around church all my life, I've noticed a trend that the traditional church people, the church people that's been in church forever, they seem to be some of the ones that have the least amount of faith and the least amount of action. Now, I'm not knocking them, I'm not being mean or anything like that. I'm just saying that's the pattern that I've seen a lot. And oftentimes it's the person that's just gotten saved that really believe and obey what God tells them to do. And so Jesus Christ is saying here that the one that actually obeys and follows me, that's the one that I'm rewarding. And he's saying that the harlots and the publicans, and what he's saying is like the people that everybody else esteem the lowest, because those people have followed me and are obedient to what I said, those will be first. And so can I say that just because we wear a shirt and tie and come to church all the time doesn't mean that we're being obedient in our faith. Just because we look like a Christian don't mean we really are a Christian. And so it's important that we are like the story here. When Jesus tells somebody to go, it's important that we go and that we're obedient in that and that we don't just look like a good son and actually not be a good son. There's plenty of those. Y'all remember the story of the prodigal son? He had a brother, and his brother, he looked like he had it going on. He looked like a good son, but at the end of the day, he really wasn't, was he? And so I want to ask you today, do you have an obedient faith when the Lord deals with you, when the Lord talks to you? Are you being obedient to what the Lord wants you to do? I mentioned in Sunday school this morning, there's a big difference between a believer and a Christian. I'm sure everybody in here would claim to be a believer. But based on what a Christian really is, could you claim to be a Christian? And so it's important that we're obedient in our faith, and so that people can see that we have a real faith and that we don't have something that's fake. In the book of James, if you read like chapter 1 and 2, James, he keeps making references to, show me your faith and I'll show you my works by my faith. And so what James is trying to provoke people to action is what he's trying to do there. And so, are you provoking anybody to action based on your faith? Are you being obedient enough that your faith is affecting anyone else? Just because we go to church and just because we try to look like a Christian don't mean that we're actually being obedient to what God wants us to do. If you'll turn over to Acts chapter number 26, I want to show you another example here. Acts chapter number 26, and I want to talk to you about a persuading faith. Acts 26, a persuading faith. Now, we all know that the Apostle Paul, he spent quite a bit of time in prison, right? And so he wrote several of the epistles. He wrote them from prison. And so as he's in prison and as he writes these epistles and he's still being obedient to God, he's still doing things, then one day he finds himself sitting before Agrippa. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I don't know that I'd have a very good attitude sitting in prison. I go in there about once a month to preach, and what I figured out going in there and preaching is that is no place I want to have to stay. And so I learned that from the first time I ever went in one. I remember I went in one down in Montgomery, Alabama, and I mean, it's like an old school prison. And so we're standing there to get in, and they take our IDs and all that stuff. And so when they told us to walk over to this door, and so I'm standing there at this door, and it's like something you'd hear in the movie. They start to open that door, and you hear that thing start chinking. Like chink, 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 cling. And so then when I stepped through that door and it come back across, I thought, man, I'm really in now. And that messes with your head. And what I realized walking through that prison is, man, this is no place I want to have to stay at. And we was coming out one night, and all the guys were lined up against the wall in this one room, and we didn't know what was going on. And so we're walking through there, and there's a whole pile of like razor blades laying on the floor, and somebody just cut some dude up in the hallway. And so prison is not an ideal place to be, right? And so today's a lot more cushionier than what it was in Paul's day. But here Paul is, he's stuck in this prison, and there's no telling at the things he probably had to put up with, the things he had to see because of that. But whenever Paul gets before Agrippa and he has this conversation with Agrippa, and he's standing there with chains on his arms, and he's telling Agrippa, man, I wished everybody that can hear the sound of my voice could be like me, all except for these chains. That's the statement that Paul makes. And then when you get down to verse number 28, then Agrippa makes a statement to Paul. And now look at this. In verse 28 it says, then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Now here's the interesting thing is, what did Paul have to offer Agrippa? He's standing there in shackles. He's got nothing. Agrippa, he's sitting on the other side, probably in a very luxurious chair. He's probably wearing the nicest robe, and he's got any food he could possibly want. He's connected politically. He's got all these great benefits in life. And when Paul gets done giving him the gospel of Jesus Christ, Agrippa says, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Now, that's a really persuading faith right there, isn't it? And can I say that people can see when something is real, and people want something that's real, and if we will be real Christians and have a real faith, then we can make a difference and persuade people into believing in that faith. Now, I don't know about y'all, but how often have you been out somewhere and going to give somebody a tract and you get intimidated because you think, well, this person, they've already got it going on. Or they've got, and so a lot of times we get intimidated about trying to give somebody a tract or trying to witness to them because we feel inferior to them, right? There's no way that we could find a possible situation more disadvantaged than Paul there. And Paul, in a completely disadvantaged situation, almost converted a guy that had everything. You know, there was only one thing that Agrippa didn't have, and that was Jesus. And Paul almost converted Agrippa to have Jesus that day, just based on how real and persuading Paul's faith was. And so I want to ask you today, how persuading is your faith? Can people look at your life and see your faith being so real that when you tell them about Jesus or you want to talk to them about God, that it makes a difference in their life because they see how real your faith is in your life? Can I say people's got enough fake stuff today? They don't want anything else fake, but they do want something that's real. And if we will have a real faith, then our faith can make a difference in others. Spurgeon, he made a statement, and it said, "Oh, that men were wise enough to see that suffering for Christ is an honor, that the loss for truth is gain, and the truest dignity rests in wearing the chain upon the arm rather than endure the chain upon the soul." That's what Charles Spurgeon said. And so can I say that if we have a persuading faith, and whenever we take our gospel outside of the church, then we can make a difference and change other people's life if we have a faith like Paul have. Now I want to ask you today, do you have a persuading faith though? And so we looked at a believing faith, we looked at an obedient faith, we looked at a persuading faith. And so does that faith match up with your faith this morning? Timothy, he had his grandmother Lois, his mother Eunice. Those two ladies, they had a faith that affected Timothy and caused Timothy to be a great young pastor because of their faith. And can I say that based on your faith, is there anybody else that's going to have a good life based on seeing your faith? Is your faith affecting someone else in a positive way? As Christians, that's kind of our job, isn't it? That us as Christians, we have a positive impact on our community, and so that our faith is passed on to someone else and affected by someone else. I don't know about you, but I don't want people in my family and I don't want my kids to not have a true, real faith, right? I mean, everybody would agree with that. But how are they going to have a true, real faith if I don't have one? And so as you think about your kids or your grandkids this morning, is your faith real enough that whenever they have problems that they know that, man, if I just get that faith that they have, I can make it through it? And so it's important that we have a real faith and not a fake faith. And can I say that in a world of so many fake things today, real things stand out? I mean, it really stands out. My mother, she works at a bank, and so whenever somebody comes in and pass off counterfeits, you know how she can spot a fake right away because she knows what's real. They don't give her fake bills and try to get her to find the fake ones. They just give her the real ones. And she handles the real ones, and then when she touches a fake one, she knows, oh, that's fake. And so as we're out into this world, the world is so used to fake stuff so much that if we show them something real, man, they'll be like, man, there's something different about that. You know, there's something non-selfish about this. Why? Because real faith is not selfish. And just like we talked about earlier, how we're to love one another. If we have a real faith, it'll cause us to love others, and then other people will realize very quickly that, man, there's something different about that kind of faith. And so lastly, I want to ask you this last question, and that is, do you have a saving faith? Agrippa, he was so close to having a saving faith. I mean, literally, standing right before Paul, the guy that wrote 13 books of the Bible, and just presented with the gospel, and Agrippa says, man, I almost am persuaded to be a Christian because he could see the realness of Paul's faith that day. And I want to ask you, have you ever found a point to where you had saving faith, where you believe Jesus Christ can save you? Can I tell you, He will save you? Just like He saved Paul. Paul was a wicked sinner. Jesus Christ saved him, just like Jesus Christ would have saved Agrippa. Can I say that Jesus Christ will save you if you hadn't already been saved? And without that saving faith, nothing else we've even talked about this morning even matters. Because unless you get started out on ground level, you know, the cross, it's where it all begins. Unless we get started out there, nothing else really matters. And so, Miss Leslie, you mind coming to the piano? And so we're fixing to have an invitation here in just a second. And as we have this invitation, I want you to just examine your faith this morning and see, do you have a real faith, or are you just kind of become religious? I don't know if you've read the news very much this week, but man, there's several scandals going on about religious stuff in society. And you know, the reason why there's all these scandals and all this stuff going on is because that stuff is not real faith, it's just religion. And if we can show our community, our co-workers, our family, if we can show them a real faith, man, it will make all the difference in their life. And if your faith is not changing you, then how is it going to change somebody else? And so as we stand this morning, I just want to ask you, is your faith changing who you are? And if it is changing who you are, then is it changing anyone else?